Well, hello, howdy, and hi, and welcome to another presentation of Branches of Yah. Today we are going to be talking about the agreement of salt. It's you got to serve somebody. And so I would like you to like this video, share it, and subscribe, but mostly share. Share the word in the words of life. Share our Father's words. Share his two greatest commands with everyone everywhere you go. This is the most important thing we can do right now. So, brethren, a number of years ago during his Christian phase, Bob Dylan wrote a song called Gotta Serve Somebody. In this song, Dylan mentions all kinds of people, lifestyles, and professions, yet the bottom line for every person, no matter who they are or what they do, is that they must serve somebody. Either the devil or Yahuwah. You can dress Satan up with all the religious finery you desire. See 1 Corinthians 8, 4-6. But in the end, it's still Satan and not the one true Yah. 1 Corinthians 10, 18-22. Whom you serve will be seen in your thoughts and words and or actions. And I believe this truth is found in a little used Tanakh phrase, the agreement of salt. Though it is only used 3 times in Scripture, it has great significance to the believer in Yahushua today. The first time this phrase is found is in Leviticus 2:13, where the order of the words is salt of the agreement. The context of this passage is the grain offering, which was to have salt added to it. But the Ruach didn't stop with just the grain offerings. He had Moshe write in the same verse that the Israelites were to add salt to all your offerings. Thus, all offerings made by the Israelites to Yahuwah, not just grain offerings, were to have salt added to them. The second usage found in Bamidbar, Numbers 18:19, is also in the context of offerings. This time, however, the word order has been changed to agreement of salt. In Bamidbar 18, Yahuwah tells Moshe to instruct Aharon and the Levites that it is their responsibility to take care of the tabernacle. Moshe was also to let them know that all the Kadesh offerings that the Israelites give me, I give to you and your sons as a portion of a regular share. This was their allotment, as they were not going to receive any inheritance in the land, because Elohim was their inheritance. Hallelujah. All the offerings, except the burnt offerings, belonged to them. Elohim was letting them know that he himself was going to provide for them, though the offerings given by the people, whatever is set aside from the Kadesh offerings the Israelites present to Yahuwah, I give to you. It is an everlasting agreement of salt before Yahuwah. Now the Kohanim were to serve Elohim and trust him for their livelihoods. The last time the phrase is found in 2 Chronicles 13:5, in this particular passage, Yahuwah gave the kingship of Yisrael to Daud and his descendants forever through an agreement of salt. Although the previous 2 usages are found in the context of offerings, this one is clearly devoid of them. The 2 Chronicles passage appears to be totally unrelated to the previous 2 usages, yet is it? Since the Scriptures itself never directly defines a phrase in any of these passages, how does one discover what Elohim is trying to tell us through them? Now, equally important, what does it mean to the believer in Yahushua today? Some scholars point out that the salt was used as a preserving element. It was added to the meat to help it stay fresh longer until the priest could eat it. And other points to the prohibition of eating meat containing blood, and salt was applied to the offering after it was killed and the skin removed to aid in the removal of the blood from the carcass. Salt was therefore seen as a cleansing or purifying agent as well. Now, I only have one problem with these 2 lines of reasoning. Salt was to be added to all your offerings, including the grain offering, which has no blood. And the burnt offerings, which were to have salt, were never to be eaten by the priest, as the entire animal was consumed by fire. That's in Leviticus 1. Therefore, in those cases, no preservation or cleansing agent would be needed. Now, furthermore, it couldn't just be related to the Kohanim, as the phrase agreement of salt was also used with Daud, who was from the tribe of Yehuda, thus meaning the salt agreement had to mention and mean something other than preservation, prevention from eating blood, or cleansing. And one scholar noted that salt had an enduring quality, and therefore in the Middle East, salt was used in ceremonies to seal an agreement. Hence, the idea may simply be that Elohim's call upon the Kohanim and their service should endure, i.e., overcome all things. I believe this definition is heading in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough, as is used in connection with the house of Daud and the Israelites who presented the offerings. Something more is going on with this agreement of salt. And could it be that the agreement of salt was all about a relationship with Elohim based upon trust? The people were to trust Elohim by giving the salt that was put in their offering. Their Elohim would provide for them, and they were to give back out of love and obedience. The priests and the Levites were to trust Elohim by serving him without a land inheritance like their brothers. Their Elohim would provide for their livelihood while they were away from their cities, which were interspersed throughout all of Yisrael. Daud and his sons were to trust Elohim as the king and serve him, believing he would keep the throne moving through Daud's line long after Daud and his sons departed the scene. And when we break down the phrase into its component words and put them back together again, this is the truth I believe that Yahuwah is trying to convey in the phrase agreement of salt. He desires a relationship with his people based upon trust that is seen in their actions and eventually through a changed life. The first word in the phrase agreement is the Hebrew word barith, or some people know it as brit. This word basically means an agreement or an alliance between two parties, where each party makes a pledge to keep their end of the bargain. The first time this word is found is in Bereshith or Genesis 6:18. Now Noah was told to build the ark and gather the animals, and if Noah would fulfill his end of the bargain, Elohim would get them safely through the coming storm. This took trust. In order to go through the embarrassment of building a boat so far away from water, in order to start gathering supplies for animals, which he had quite possibly never seen or heard of before, Noah had to trust Elohim to keep his end of the bargain. This agreement was based upon a mutual trust. If Noah did his part, would he trust Elohim to do his? Well, the answer is given right after Elohim writes up the contract. Noah did everything just as Elohim commanded him. Noah showed his trust in Elohim through his actions of living out the words of the contract or agreement. Now, sometimes these agreements are applied to both parties, as previously mentioned. At the other times, it is totally coincidental and conditional upon one party. Now, this is seen in Bereshith or Genesis 9:9, when Elohim made a deal with Noah to never destroy the earth again by water. The passage never says Noah had to do anything but trust his Elohim to fulfill his word. Now, one can understand why Elohim said this to Noah too. Noah had just gotten off the wildest ride of his life. I believe Elohim was calming Noah's nerves a little here. And when Noah stepped off the boat, he could have been thinking, I sure hope I never have to go through that again. And Elohim comes to Noah's rescue. Relax, Noah, it's over. Neither you nor your descendants will ever have to repeat this heart-racing experience. Still, what would it take? Trusting in Elohim's word. Every time the sky started clouding up, Noah would need to remember Elohim's word. No more floods. As he trusted Elohim's word, peace would replace the anxiety. But first, Noah had to trust. More examples could be given, but trust is the basis of any barith or agreement. It's an agreement between two parties based in trust to fulfill their end of the deal. Now let's consider the idea behind the Hebrew word for salt, melach. Now that's mem, lamed, and het, a noun that comes from the root word malach, which means to rub to pieces or pulverize, to disappear as dust, or to season or rub with salt. Mem, of course, water, living water, Torah, chaos, and can symbolize many, as in a nation or peoples. Lamed is, of course, a teacher, and a leader, a shepherd, or even students, i.e., his taught ones, or to be yoked to the world or the shepherd. And het, or haith, as some people say, is fence. It's a protection or a hedge of protection to separate yourself, to be set apart, or to be separated, as in cut off by Yah or by our actions. Even the word and letters show both the positive meaning, the barakoth, it's a gift of honor, of the shepherd who brings the living water, the word, to the students, taught ones, that the people / nations might be yoked to the shepherd, receiving the living water of the word, the Torah, and its protections, and are set apart to Yah, protected from the chaos of the world, separated from its teachings, receiving the light, no longer cut off, preserved and protected from the day of judgment. Or conversely, we can see the curse of those yoked to the chaos of the world, who are shepherded by its teachings and reject the leadership of the good shepherd and living water of the Torah. They are cut off by their actions and separated or cut off from Yah, loving the world, and cast into outer and utter darkness, scattered to the wind, pulverized and destroyed. Melech is primarily used for the salt, like Dead Sea salt. Genesis or Bereshith 14:3, Bamidbar, Numbers 34:3 and 12, and Devarim or Deuteronomy 3:17, and Yahshua or Yahusha 3:16, which will one day be made fresh again. Yehezkel or Ezekiel 47:11. Now there is an important clue here for our understanding of the phrase agreement of salt. Keep something in mind. The body of water was once salty or dead, but will one day be made fresh or alive again. What I find interesting about Melech, however, is the first time it is used in the scriptures in Bereshith, Genesis 19:26, as Lot's wife is turned into salt for looking back. Though the word for agreement is not used in this story, the Melech or messenger had an agreement with Lot. The Melech would only destroy Sodom and Amorah after Lot and his family were out of town and had safely reached the city of Zoar. Well, what did Lot's wife do? She did not keep her agreement to not look back. It appears that she left her heart in Sodom with the accompanying lifestyle she left behind. In her heart, she didn't want to leave and thus was judged for it when she was turned into salt or disappeared as dust, a metaphor or idiom as to be no more or removed even from memory. Do you know Lot's wife's name? Did Lot and his kids lament her loss? The idea of pulverizing something in order to scatter it to the wind is also seen in Shoftim or Judges 9:45, when Abimelech destroyed the city of Shechem and poured salt over it. In this story, the people of Shechem rebel against their leaders, Gideon's sons. The citizens of Shechem made Abimelech king, after which Abimelech wipes out every single son of Gideon except one, Jotham. In order to right this wrong, Elohim strengthens the hearts of the citizens to rebel or break their agreement with Abimelech, who in turn wipes them out. Again, it is the same as Lot's wife. Just as she rebelled and paid the consequences for it, so did the city of Shechem. Melech is not only associated with death and destruction and judgment, it is also associated with the sacrificial system, Leviticus 2:13. Now stop for a moment and ask yourself, what was the purpose of the sacrificial system? And according to Abri or Hebrews 9:11, 10:18, sacrifices pointed to the one who would take the punishment or the negative consequences of our sinful actions, death, destruction, and judgment, Yahusha or Yahushua. In him, we find forgiveness and restoration to a relationship that was broken because we refused to trust our Elohim and his way of living. Continuing on, in Shemot 30 or Exodus 34 through 38, It uses melech in the process of making the temple incense. Daud wrote in Tehillim, or Psalms 141:2, May my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. Both of which, incense and sacrifice, had salt added to them. Is it possible that salt aids our worship to Elohim? Could every act of faith or trust/agreement be an act of salting our worship? See 1 Corinthians 10:31. Shaul, as a Cohen, would have known the above Tanakh passages. In fact, Shaul uses temple and sacrifice imagery quite often in all of his writings. So when he penned the words in Romans 12:1-2, that we were to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, kadesh and pleasing to Yah, could he have been thinking of the salt added to all the sacrifices? Shaul goes on to say that once we offer ourselves to Elohim, we are to let him change our lives through changing our mind, which in turn changes our behavior, esteeming and honoring, and thus worshiping the Elohim we say we love. It's interesting that Revelations 8:3 uses the same imagery. Incense on the golden altar, meaning the incense altar in front of the veil between the set apart and the most Kadesh place, where the coals from the outside bronze sacrificial altar were laid and the incense was poured on top of the burning coals, causing smoke. Do our lives, both the offerings and the incense, smell honorable to our Elohim? But there is more. Yehezkel 16:6 states that Yashrael was not born with the right to be Elohim's child. When they were born, their cord was not cut. They were not washed with water and rubbed with salt or wrapped in swaddling clothes. No, Elohim took them and made them his. The context here is that Yashrael was still living like her parents, the Hittites and the Amorites, in full idolatry mode. They were still tied to an umbilical cord to their mother. In other words, her behavior hadn't changed. Yashrael was still acting like her parents, and if her umbilical cord was not cut, she would die. Again, we discover that salt carries the idea of worshiping the one true Elohim. The Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob, through Yashrael trusting their Elohim by cutting her ties to the idolatrous parents / their past, Yashrael needed to make an agreement of salt with their Elohim to follow him and worship him alone. The next two places where salt is used are also very insightful. In 2 Kings, or Melachim 2:20-21, salt was used to heal a body of water so that it could be drinkable. Now think about that for a second. When salt is added to water, one gets salt water, not fresh. You might use salt water to gargle, but certainly not to drink. Now imagine what was going through the minds of those watching Elisha throw salt into the putrid water hole. Now, Elisha, hold on. You're going to make the situation worse. Are you sure Yahuwah said to do this? It doesn't make sense, Elisha. Why would you waste valuable salt by throwing it into an already bad source of water? You're just throwing it away. And why would Elisha do it? Trust. After Elisha threw the salt into the water, it became drinkable. How would the people know it was safe and beneficial to drink? They would have to trust their Elohim enough to dip their hand into the water and draw it to their lips. Pouring salt must have seemed like a crazy thing to do to them. But when it comes to walking with our Elohim, isn't that what it takes? Going against the way we think to do what he tells us to do? This is the same idea behind Ayub, or Job 6:6, when Ayub makes the point that salt is added to tasteless food to make it worth eating again. Isn't this just like our Elohim to make something tasty out of two things that don't seem to belong together? The question is, will we trust him? Furthermore, didn't it take trust to give up the salt in the first place? Where did the salt for the sacrifices come from? The incense, the healing of the water. It came from the Yashraelites. Look at it from their point of view. Salt contained the very elements necessary for their survival. During the times of the Tanakh, Yisrael was primarily an agricultural society, and they worked out in the sun for a living, which brought on a lot of sweat. And because of this, they would need to replenish their bodies with sodium and chloride, of which salt is a plentiful source. Now, these two elements, along with potassium, are involved in everything you do, from nerve impulse conduction to muscle contraction. And if these three elements get out of balance in your system, you're not going to have a pleasurable day. Now here comes your Elohim telling you that you must give him some of your salt. Would you trust him? Would you give your precious salt to Elisha to throw into your bad spring? Would you trust your Elohim and add salt to all your sacrifices? This is why I believe Elohim put the last usage of agreement of salt with the house of Daud. It ties the two ideas of salt and agreement together. The world can get along without pepper, but it can't get along without salt. This is referring to 2 Chronicles 13:5 passage, where Elohim gave the kingship of Yisrael to Daud and his descendants forever by an agreement of salt. Treaties were sealed in salt. Agreements were based upon trust. Giving someone your salt was a sign of that trust. And Elohim was making a treaty with Daud to have his children sit on the throne forever, no matter how right or wrong they were. So when we put the words agreement and salt back together, it stands for the idea of two parties making and keeping an agreement with each other based upon trust. The word salt gives us the truth that we should trust our Elohim enough to live with and for him in our everyday lives. In the everyday decisions we encounter, we are to sacrifice our way of living and thinking and trust his word. The agreement gives us the thought that when we trust our Elohim and live his way, our part of the agreement, he will change our lives for the better. One where no judgment is needed, his part of the agreement. He can make life come out of the dead areas of our life. He can turn an unsatisfying life into a tasty and beneficial one. Where we were once alone, we can now communicate with the Elohim of the universe. Instead of fear and anxiety, we have shalom. We have peace. The agreement of salt is all about who are you going to serve, Yah or Satan? Serve Satan, the world, and be judged, eventually die forever. Or serve Yah and be saved and taste righteousness both now and forever. I believe we find the same meaning carried over into the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament. The scriptures are consistent throughout because it's one book written and inspired by one author with one message. In order to help us see this, let's use the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Tanakh, to follow our words forward. And according to the Septuagint, the Hebrew word for salt, melech, in Leviticus 2:23 becomes the Greek word halas. Halas, or salt, is used also in Matthew 5:13, where Yahushua states that we are the salt of the earth. Now, most commentaries talk about salt as a preserving agent. As believers live for Yahushua, they slow down the decay of this plane when believers are finally passed. And as Yahushua said in Matthew 24:22, if Elohim didn't shorten the days of Jacob's trouble, no one would survive the tremendous evil that was and will be unleashed. And as I came to understand the Tanakh concept of the agreement of salt, it made me re-examine that passage in Matthew 24. I discovered the immediate context of Yahushua's salt of the earth statement is being persecuted for righteousness. He just got done telling those listening to him on the mountainside that if they would be Baruch over and over, if he followed him, one of those Barakoth was persecution. If one lives for Yahushua as the salt of the earth, one should expect to be insulted, persecuted, and falsely accused. Yahushua is telling his followers the reality of following him, the honorable, the bad, and the ugly truth of it all. And he continues this line of thinking in Lucas 14:26-34-35. In this passage, Yahushua also uses salt in the context of counting the cost of being his disciple. He tells those listening to him that they must love him more than their family, their very life itself. Then after talking about calculating the cost of building a tower and going to war, he states that once salt loses its saltiness, it's not useful for anything. Even for fertilizer, it has no value whatsoever. So he tells his listeners to listen up. Living for him will not be a walk in the park. It will cost them something. So think about it before they began the journey. In Marcus 9:42 through 50, Yahushua moves past the counting of the cost to actually living for him. Salt is now used in the context of living in such a way as not to be a stumbling block to other believers, the little ones who believe in me, causing them to sin. He goes on to emphasize this point by saying, if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Notice Yahushua changed the subject of the sentence from just anyone to you. Believers in Yahushua are to live in such a way that their lives will affect others in a positive manner. And after saying this, Yahushua then makes the statement, everyone will be salted with fire. Wow. Will you trust your Elohim enough to live his way during the fiery trials of life? Yahushua finishes his discourse in Marcus 9 with this. Have salt, Malak, in yourselves, and be at peace with each other. What's the big deal about being peace with each other? It's a sign that believers trust and is living for Yahushua in their everyday lives. Yahushua said that there would be 3 distinguishing marks of those who call themselves his disciples. One would be loving each other. That's in Jonathan 13:34 through 35. 2, they would bear the fruit of a changed life. Also Jonathan 15:1 through 8. And 3, they would live in unity. Jonathan 17:20 through 23. We are to be salted so others will know he is Elohim. We are to trust our Elohim enough to live his way 7 days a week. And when we do, the world will know we are his. And guess what happens then? It's the point of Yahushua's next statement in Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. A light doesn't necessarily draw attention to itself. Its real purpose is to shine on something else so it can be seen. This is the context of his next statement. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your honorable deeds and praise your Father in the heavens. As we live a salty life, one based upon trust, people will see Yahushua in us and hopefully want a relationship with him. This is what the Ruach had written in Colossians 4:6. Let your conversation be always full of mercy, seasoned with salt, so you know how to give an answer to everyone. The context is sharing the Bashar of Yahushua. Shaul told the Colossians to be wise in how they acted, trust and action, towards those who don't know Yahushua, so they can make the most out of every opportunity to share the Yahushua story and how he had changed their life. How does this happen? It comes back to the point I made earlier in Romans 12:1 through 2, which I believe is the agreement of salt in action. As we offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, where salt was added, you are dying to self and living for Elohim. How is this seen? Trusting Elohim's word, the basis of an agreement, and allowing him to change your life on a daily basis, transformed by the renewing of your mind. As you agree to worship him through your everyday actions, even when it costs you something or it goes against the way of thinking, you become salty, which will make people thirsty enough to ask, where do you find your peace in the midst of tough times? How can you live the way you do when everyone else is doing the opposite? Those who are the salt of the earth will automatically be the light of the world and will be ready to shine their light on Yahushua. And it's your choice. Your actions will tell whether you are serving Yahuwah or Satan. What do your actions say about you? As a believer in Yahushua, if you don't serve Yahushua, your life will not only be unsatisfying, but it will also lose its meaning and purpose. You'll become what Yahushua says, to salt that is no longer salty, trampled by men. Why would anyone want to listen to you? We are all to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice daily, choosing to trust Elohim rather than ourselves in our everyday thoughts, attitudes, decisions, words, and actions. We are to be salty, which in turn leads to being a light. Yet, we get to choose whom we will serve. And it's like the song says, you got to serve somebody. Who's it going to be? Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you got something out of this. I'd love to hear your feedback. And remember, being salty isn't cantankerous, but it's seasoned. for a purpose in Yah's use. Well, as our dear sister over at Ancient Path Remnant would say, we'll see you on the next one, Yah willing. Thank you, brethren. Bye.